You think healing means feeling light again, a return to an untroubled tide. But Jung blew that notion apart, turning it on its head. The people who've healed the deepest aren't the ones who glide through life untouched by dusk. They're the ones who've learned to sit with the darker currents and direct them with intention. And these 7 signs aren't just markers. They're a map showing you've moved beyond simply patching wounds to truly integrating the full spectrum of your humanity. Today, I'm sketching the psychological shifts that unfold when you've brought your shadow into the light, not merely buried it deeper. Most people imagine healing as perpetual joy, flawless boundaries, and never getting triggered again. That fantasy collapses under scrutiny. Jung dedicated decades to watching patients who genuinely healed from trauma, and what he found was unsettling. Real healing doesn't soften you. It makes you more deliberate, more precise, and more capable of choosing how you show up. The difference isn't softness versus hardness. It's agency, how you wield your darkness with awareness, rather than letting it pull you into reflexive drama. The great hinge in Jung's work was the simple but radical truth. The path to wholeness runs through your shadow, not away from it. When you've integrated what you once denied, your inner life stops acting out as a hidden adversary and starts serving you as a trusted ally. That shift creates 7 unmistakable psychological transitions that many people overlook until you recognize them in yourself and realize how far you've actually traveled. The most dangerous state Jung identified wasn't rage or fear. It was shadow projection with absolute conviction, when someone refuses to own the denied parts of themselves and projects them onto others as if those flaws lived only in other people. They become psychologically toxic, even while they insist they're innocent. They rewrite reality to defend a fantasy about themselves, and their certainty erodes trust with a quiet, corrosive power. But the moment you've healed, that dynamic dissolves. You stop seeing enemies everywhere. You stop believing you know the hidden motives of everyone around you with absolute certainty. When someone triggers you, your first response isn't to fix them or to declare them defective. It's to ask what unintegrated part of me is reflected back here. This doesn't make you naive or unaware of real manipulation. It makes you capable of distinguishing external threats from internal contents that have been projected outward. Jung called this conscious discrimination, the ability to see clearly what belongs to you and what is someone else's story. When you reach this, you've passed the first and arguably the most essential test of genuine healing. You're no longer unconsciously dangerous to the people around you. The unhealed empath often acts as an emotional flux capacitor for their entire environment. They absorb everything convinced this saturation is their gift. Jung labeled this pattern as psychological vampirism. In reverse, the empath doesn't drain others so much as they allow others' distress to drain them, until there's nothing left. And when you've healed, a radical reorientation occurs. You become selectively empathetic. You still feel deeply, you still read others' emotional currents with accuracy, but you decide where your empathy flows. Your sensitivity ceases to be a sacred burden, forcing self-sacrifice. It becomes a guarded resource that you deploy with strategy. Suddenly, the drama seekers in your life find you unavailable, not because you've turned cold, but because you've learned to protect your own emotional economy. You're not absorbing their panic and racing to fix them at your own expense. You're seeing the mechanism by which manipulation takes root. and choosing not to feed it. You don't lose your capacity to care, you refine it into discernment. And you protect it with boundaries that aren't excuses but explicit rights. Jung also highlighted a rare gift called differentiated intuition, the ability to detect patterns and unconscious content that many miss. Before healing, this clarity can alienate you from ordinary connection. You see too much, feel too much, and sense motives that others aren't ready to reveal. In that state, you may feel like a witness from another planet, exhausted by the sheer volume of depth you carry. After healing, you don't abandon this gift. You reframe it. You integrate it with other psychological functions, so you can engage with people at the pace they're comfortable with, instead of insisting on depth in every encounter. Perceiving deeply remains part of your toolkit, but you learn to hold your perceptions lightly, to speak when it serves, and to listen when the moment calls for presence. You inhabit multiple registers, profound insight when needed, ordinary ease when the moment calls for a lighter touch. Another hard-won correction is to your relationship with reality itself. The unhealed can fall prey to what Jung called reality distortion fields. Someone projects their shadow onto you with such certainty that your own inner experience is called into question. They insist you're angry when you're calm, that you're manipulative when you're direct, and their certainty becomes a solvent that threatens to dissolve your trust in your own perceptions. This vulnerability to gaslighting exposes a psyche still at the mercy of unintegrated content. When you've healed, that dynamic can't take root. You carry what you felt and intended with a clarity so steady that external insistence can't overturn it. You can observe projections without becoming trapped in them. And you move through the world with a quiet confidence that you know what's yours, what's theirs, and what's merely noise in the negotiation of meaning. Jung described people who reach this stage as psychologically untouchable. Not arrogant, not closed off, but equipped with such sharp conscious discrimination that they can tell when someone is describing projections rather than your reality. And then they simply carry on without defending or arguing, because the truth of their experience remains intact. If you find yourself recognizing these patterns, you're farther along the healing road than you might have imagined. Yet there are 3 more signs that reveal something deeper. The way wounds become your wisdom. The way you refuse to be trapped by past narratives. And the way you hold paradox without dissolving into it. Jung noticed a devastating compulsion. In unhealed people, they keep recreating the same painful dramas across different settings, convinced they're merely victims of fate. It's a clever loop, different cast, same ending, because the psyche seeks to complete unresolved trauma by repeating it, hoping the outcome will finally change. But when healing happens, the script changes. You can see the familiar dynamic approaching, and you choose a different line. You cease unconsciously orchestrating the pain. You stop broadcasting the signals that drew you into the old dynamics. You end the cycle not by achieving magical perfection, but by waking up to the pattern and choosing differently in the moment. You become conscious enough to see how you contribute to the storyline, and permission-giving enough to rewrite it. The unhealed psyche also clings to certainty with a kind of archetypal possession. Jung warned that when people get hooked on the certainty of a righteous stance, everything becomes black and white. Us versus them, clear villains, clear heroes, and no room for the messy truth in between. That certainty quells anxiety in the short term, but annihilates nuance in the long run. Healing introduces a different capacity holding tension. You can hold two seemingly contradictory truths at once, without insisting on immediate resolution. You can acknowledge someone as wounded and harmful at the same time. You can honor your own compassion and your capacity for cruelty, without dissolving either into denial. That tolerance for ambiguity isn't weakness. It signals a mature, integrated ego that can engage with reality, as it is complex, shifting, and never fully reducible to a single narrative. And then there are boundaries. The person who stays stuck in the perfect persona lives in perpetual fear of slipping. They are forever rehearsing politeness, propriety, and compliance, until one eruption reveals the cost of denying the shadow. Before healing, you might have boundaries that are either non-existent or explosive, either overwhelmed by others' needs, or detonating in dramatic clashes. After healing, boundaries become an everyday practice, clear, respectful, and unshakable, because they're grounded in self-knowledge. You don't protect yourself with rage or reactivity. You protect yourself by stating what works and what doesn't, and you enforce it calmly and consistently. Boundaries aren't an indulgence. They're evidence of an integrated psyche that knows its own worth and refuses to pretend otherwise. Here's the essence Jung unearthed that terrifies most researchers. When you've truly healed and fully integrated your shadow, you don't turn into a gentler version of your wounded self. You become a psychologically complete warrior. You retain the same capacity for perception, the same depth of feeling, and the same clarity of insight you had when you were hurt, only now. You wield that power with deliberate purpose. You can sense manipulation coming and neutralize it before it lands. You can feel others' pain without absorbing it. You can recognize darkness in others without needing to fix, fight, or become it. This is the transformation Jung believed was possible for everyone, but achieved by very few, moving from unconscious wounding to conscious wholeness, from being mastered by your shadow to mastering your entire range with discernment and care. The goal of healing then isn't to erase your shadow. It's to fold it into a larger, fully alive sense of self, so you can access every part of yourself consciously, rather than being driven by the pieces you deny. You don't become less sensitive. You become consciously sensitive. You don't lose your instinct to perceive deeply. You gain the wisdom to know when that depth serves you and when it doesn't. Jung spent his life mapping this possibility, because he knew something most people miss. Healing isn't about feeling better in the conventional sense. It's about becoming whole, a wholeness that includes anger, selfishness, cruelty, and every shadow facet you've ever rejected. The question is whether you'll integrate them consciously or let them steer you unconsciously. These 7 signs are the markers telling you you've chosen integration. You've done the work most people avoid their entire lives. You've looked at your shadow, acknowledged it, and learned to wield it alongside your light. And that makes you one of the rarest psychological types. Jung studied someone healed enough to be dangerous to dysfunction, yet safe for authentic connection. You're healing more than you realize. Every time you catch yourself before projecting, every time you choose boundaries without drama, every time you tolerate ambiguity instead of demanding certainty, you demonstrate a degree of integration that most never achieve. If you recognize yourself in these 7 signs, share in the comments which sign resonated most powerfully. Your healing journey matters, and others walking the same path need to know they're not alone. Subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology insights that reveal how transformation actually works, not how we wish it worked. And if you're ready to understand the darker side of this transformation, watch my next video where I reveal what Jung discovered about empaths who finally learn to use their gifts strategically. Because the awakened empath isn't merely healed, they're psychologically unstoppable. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages. An 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook beautifully designed is in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.